Hello and welcome to this special episode of looking at the astrology of Neptune in Aries. So tomorrow, January 26th, Neptune is going to be entering into Aries for its next 165-year cycle around the zodiac wheel. We had it dipped into Aries a little bit in 2025, so we kind of got a preview of what this energy might bring, but now starting tomorrow, it is going to stay for its 14-year cycle in Aries, but it's starting its next 165-year cycle. So in this video, this is a special video where I'm going to dive into the history of Neptune in Aries and what these 165-year cycles have been, what the flavors and things like that have been, so we can see not only where we have been, but where we're going and what makes this time period so much different than any time period in history before. So if you're new here, hi, welcome. I am Sarah at Life with Training Wheels, where I look to use astrology, tarot, and other spiritual and health and wellness tools to help empower you to become the highest and best version of yourself and to release any sort of victim mentality or anything like that you may have. One of my favorite quotes is, "Wherever you go, there you are." And I utilize these tools to kind of learn to embody that, learn to understand ourselves better, and learn to see what we are here to do in this lifetime. So if that's something that you want to keep watching and listening to me on, I'd love if you give me a like, a subscribe, a comment, anything like that. And like I said, if you're new here, welcome. If you are returning, thank you so much for returning. All of your support I greatly, greatly appreciate. Just a little bit about the structure of my channel before we start. I do try to post the daily astrology as little short videos. I did miss I missed January 23rd, so I am going to catch up on that. We are still likely feeling the energy of that day, and I always like to do astrology in hindsight anyway. Sometimes you get more insight into looking at how the astrology actually played out rather than kind of forecasting in your mind how it might play out during the day. And then I also do new moon and full moon videos. I try to do videos at the beginning of the month looking at the energy of the month ahead, and then if there's anything major going on, such as Neptune entering Aries or anything like that, I try to do those videos as well. I do have a course going on right now, a beginner's, it's called Your First Astrology course. Link will be in the description box below for that. I'm also trying to start up a Patreon group where it's just kind of a group of learning astrology, learning how to read natal charts, learning different aspects of astrology, and putting it into practice in a group format, and giving little individual readings to subscribers monthly. So if that's something that you think you might like to join, the link for that will be in the description box below. I haven't quite gotten it started, but I plan to as soon as I start getting some traction on it. So without further ado, let's dive into this. So before we start looking at charts and stuff, let's just talk a little bit about what Neptune in Aries is. So Neptune itself represents spirituality, dreams, visions. It's a planet of compassion, universal love, oneness, and that concept of oneness, connection to the other realms, so connection to, our higher self, the divine, God, whatever you want to call it. But it also, so that's the highest vibration of it. On the lower vibrations, it can also represent delusion and deception. It also governs things like pharmaceuticals, addiction, and escapism. So those are the more negative aspects of Neptune. And every Neptune in Aries ingress, every time Neptune enters into Aries, a new spiritual season for humanity is born. It always equates to new cycles of spiritual individuation, visionary activism, battles of ideology, rebirths of religious identities, and the rise of new mythologies. So every cycle sees that in some shape or form, and we're going to go into that. And so the best way to understand where we've been and where we might be going is to look at the history and the patterns that have preceded where we are now. So that is what we are going to be doing in this video. And I believe we're going to be looking at about 5 or 6 time periods. So this may be a little bit longer video if you're interested in looking at a certain time period. I will timestamp this in the description box. But so for each cycle, we'll look at the ingress chart by looking at the dispositor or the ruler of Neptune and Aries, which would be Mars. So this will tell us a lot about the main theme of what is going on during that cycle as the ruler of Neptune and Mars. And then we'll look at what the North Node and South Node are doing, because that overall represents kind of where the collective, it's a shorter cycle. That's like an 18-month cycle, but at the moment of the ingress, it does represent the direction of the next 165-year Neptune cycle, where humanity is meant to kind of learn and grow, and things that we might be ready to release as a collective. Then we'll look at the Jupiter and Saturn signatures, as these signatures represent collective destiny as well, and what we're, Jupiter with where we're growing, Saturn with where we might feel some restriction and tension and boundaries and things like that. And then we'll also look to Uranus and Pluto, which will be guiding more and representing more the world events and revolutions going on during each time period. The Sun will kind of give the flavor of the era and kind of what individuals are working on during the time period. And Chiron will give us an idea of where the collective wound and healing is emerging from. And sometimes from what I've been looking at it, like the wound kind of starts at the beginning of the cycle, and then there's a healing by the end of the cycle and moving into the next one, if that makes sense. So first we're going to look to the most recent cycle to see where we've been in the immediate past. So that would be Neptune entering Aries in 1862. Before we get that, I also am going to link in the description box below, or maybe up here if I can figure out how, a link to one of my favorite astrologers, Astrolata. She just did a really great video on Neptune in Aries and compared it, instead of to like the entire Neptune and Aries cycle, she was just comparing Neptune and Aries to the most recent Neptune and Pisces 14-year period, which is also really good to consider and think about, because that's the most recent past. That's what we're most recently moving from, and gives an idea of where we're going, where we're correcting, things like that. So I think that's a really good and important video to watch as well. And like I said, she is one of my favorite astrologers, and I have taken some of her courses as well. But let's go ahead and get into this chart of the 1862 ingress. Okay, so here we have Neptune at 0 degrees Aries, and this marked a spiritual era of ideology, industry, and illusion. So if we look to see where Mars was here in Sagittarius. So Mars in Sagittarius is the ruler of Neptune and Pisces and gives us a lot. It's the chart ruler. So it's one of the most important things to look at and gives us an idea of what this 165-year cycle was all about. So Mars in Sagittarius is where spirituality becomes ideology. Sagittarius is the energy of belief systems, of higher education, of priests and priesthoods, and leaders and teachers and things like that. So this is, and it's also a place of foreign travel and foreign cultures and things of that nature. And so this is a fusion of religion and nationalism. And more, Mars is where we, it's our willpower, our drive, and our like will to fight for things that we believe in, right? It's our warriors. Mars is the warrior. So this period here gives us moral justifications for war and philosophical justifications for conquest, because Sagittarius is the sign of belief systems, right? So philosophical justifications for conquest. It gives us the myth of progress. That's the other thing, Sagittarius. It's the centaur, however you say it, with, the guy pointing the arrow. So always looking for forward progress, forward movement, not staying still, growth. So Mars in Sagittarius makes Neptune's spirituality a bit more combative. And in Sagittarius, truth becomes something people will fight over, and each group thinks that they have divine license, right? Because it's all about, Sagittarius is all about your belief system. So this Mars in the sign of belief systems is that clashing, and people thinking that they have the divine license, that their religion is the right and correct and true one. Then we look to see what Jupiter and Saturn are doing, and they are over here conjunct, both retrograde in the sign of Virgo, which interesting to note that right now the South Node is in the sign of Virgo, and South Node is where we want to release some things. So just as you're listening, think about that. And this is it's also in an out of sign opposition to Neptune. So there's a push-pull dynamic going on here. And with it being an out of sign, like if it was Aries versus Libra, those are two sides of the same coin, like self versus partnership. Virgo is, this is still a degree-based opposition, but it's out of sign, so these signs don't see each other as well. They don't have anything in common, so that opposition is felt even stronger. And so this opposition kind of represents the industrialization of the sacred. So Virgo rules things like labor, machinery, health, science, analysis, systems, medicine, and categorization. Like in medical astrology, it kind of represents the small intestine. That's one of the things where things are pulled apart and categorized, right, in the body. And so with the conjunction of both Saturn and Neptune retrograde, it's a new societal infrastructure being born, especially in Virgo. And so with Neptune in opposition, this is where spirituality dissolves into systems. Virgo is all about the systems. Faith becomes subordinate to empirical truth. Mysticism is marginalized because you can't taste it, touch it, smell it, feel it, right? And that's a lot of what Virgo is about. Invisible is dismissed unless it's able to be quantified. So science, right? Medicine splits from spirituality. So there used to be a lot more, like a lot of the Eastern medicine, right? Mind, body, spirit. In this last age, we separated that. Industrialization replaces craftsmanship, and the sacred gets mechanized. So this brings the illusion that rationality alone defines reality. That's where that was born, is in this opposition, in this cycle. So then we look to see what the nodes were doing in this cycle, and we had the North Node in Capricorn. North Node in Capricorn, kind of at the beginning, and therefore the South Node in Cancer. So in this kind of created a cardinal grand cross, not a super tight one, but still a cardinal grand cross with this Virgo, Jupiter, Saturn in Virgo, and the Neptune in Aries. And the cardinal grand cross energy is pretty, it's hard to, any grand cross is hard to deal with. It's a hard energy. So the cardinal energy is active. It's starting things new. And then the cross is, of course, things battling, right? So a cardinal grand cross is action through upheaval and conflict. So this indicates resets of institutions, civilization upheaval, and unstoppable restructuring. And so with the North Node in Capricorn, it was calling humanity towards structures, institutions, governments, law, and worldly order. And the South Node in Cancer was releasing tribal belonging, emotional protectionism, and inherited ancestral memory. So this was a big part of the Western world, shifting from house of family to house of nation and houses of institution, really. And one thing that I find that is fascinating as well is this time, Jupiter is retrograde right now. Jupiter is retrograde in Cancer, and I feel like one of the things, Jupiter represents wisdom, right? And retrograde, and we'll get into this later, but retrograde in Cancer, I really feel like it's bringing back a lot of the ancient wisdom, right? Which will include the, going back to houses of family. So that is that. And then we have Uranus retrograde here in Gemini, which is pretty interesting because at the ingress of Neptune and Aries tomorrow, we will be having Uranus retrograde in Gemini as well. Only in this chart, I guess they're not making any aspect, but in the chart of this time, they are in a sextile, so a supportive energy. And the other fascinating thing is that, this is in the middle of the Gemini sign, whereas currently it is at the final degrees, so carries with it a little bit different. In this cycle, it was kind of halfway through its building up, and currently, being at the final degree of tomorrow's chart, it's finishing up its lessons, finishing up what it's doing. It's mastered it. It's time to move on and into something else, right? But so Uranus retrograde in Gemini is where communications revolutions incubate. So this is one of the most important indicators of the next century. So this time period seeded the telegraph, telephone, radio, TV, internet, digital consciousness, and as we have seen most recently, AI. All Uranus and Gemini inventions. And retrograde means that the birth has been slow, internal, chaotic, and not yet integrated. But those forms of communication, although they have been great, they also have been part of the Neptune ability, especially in this last bit of Neptune and Pisces, the ability to deceive, right? And have propaganda be a thing. And, that wouldn't have been as possible if Uranus had not been in Gemini. So then we look to see where Pluto is, and Pluto is in Taurus, right here. So this is a transformation of earthly resources. So this is the economic foundation for building the economic foundation for what became capitalism. So this was mass extraction, the wage economy, global trade, mechanized agriculture, land dispossession, and the current financial systems that we have right now. And I do apologize, I misspoke just a second ago when I was talking about where Uranus currently is. Uranus currently, at tomorrow's chart, will be retrograde also, but at the final degree of Taurus, not Gemini. It won't move into Gemini, I think, until March or April. So Uranus retrograde is in Taurus at this next upcoming cycle, which is interesting because Pluto, transformed, started capitalism, started what we have going on now, which we know is crumbling, and Uranus has been helping crumble those things that haven't worked. And then at this chart, we had Chiron in Pisces at 1 degree. So this is the collective spiritual wound and longing for unity. So the whole era contains this spiritual disillusion, fragmentation, longing for God, religious trauma, escapism as coping, addiction epidemics, and the rise of psychology. So all those things are combining the energy of Pisces, which encompasses escapism, lack of boundaries, so disillusionment, longing for God. It's, the universal love concept. And with Chiron, that brings in the religious trauma, addictions, things like that. So we have definitely seen a lot of that. And then we look to see where the sun is. The sun is in Aquarius at this point. So this gives the overarching area a mission, gives us a mission to awaken collective consciousness, to redistribute power, to illuminate systems of control, to innovate spirituality, and to embrace humanitarianism. This is why the end of this cycle kind of corresponds with the explosion, which you can kind of see here because the sun is at the end here. So corresponds with the explosion of collective awakening from 2012 to 2026 till now, but really heightened 2024 to 2026. And the sun, is currently also in Aquarius for this seeding of the new Neptune cycle. So to give a synopsis of the cycle previous to this, one that we're about to enter into, the 1862 Neptune ingress chart, as we're looking at right here, describes a spiritual epoch where humanity falls into the spell of ideology, industrial systems, scientific materialism, and technological transformation, all while carrying this deep spiritual wound and yearning for unity that cannot be mechanized away. So put poetically, it's a century and a half of chasing truth through machines, worshiping progress as God, dividing over the meaning of heaven, and losing the map to the soul so we could rediscover it from scratch. And I don't know about you, but this all feels very familiar to me, and feels very true. I often think about how it feels that, like, from the period 1880 to 1920, 1930 is when it seems like, from the learning that I've done, the world went to poop. That's the time period that big oil, big pharma, education systems, etc., started to be controlled by, like, the Rockefellers and the big groups of elites and things like that. And so this chart supports that happening. So my curiosity from here took me to see where we were before this time. So what did the previous chart, what led up to this chart? Okay, so the chart before 1862, so 2 charts before we get to tomorrow's, was 1698. So this was the dream seed of enlightenment, not mechanized illusion like the 1862 chart that we just looked at. So this brought the dawning of rational mysticism, the liberation of mind, and the first collective attempts to merge cosmic order with human intellect. So again, if we look to see the ruler of Neptune and Aries here, we look to see where Mars is. So in this chart, Mars is retrograde in Libra. So it is right here. So Libra is all about relationships and getting along and harmony and balance and justice and fairness and things like that. So this brought in diplomacy, law, civics, aesthetics, also peace movements, intellectual combat rather than physical, because Mars is still the, warrior, planet of warrior. And justice as the battlefield. And then with Mars being retrograde, that gives it more, the entire cycle of flavor of karmic rebalancing, revisiting old wars perhaps through negotiation, justice perhaps delayed, collective indecision, wars of ideas rather than weapons, and spiritual refinement rather than conquest. So instead of a holy war era, this was like philosophical revolution, enlightenment, constitutional law, and the birth of modern political theory. So during this time, we had the North Node, or the South Node in Aries, and the North Node in Libra. So this brings a lot of energy to this as well, to the ruler of Neptune in Aries, right? So also to note that Mars is at its fall in Libra, since it rules Aries and it's, on the opposite side. So Mars is not as strong here. So some of these things that it's trying to accomplish, it might not do as well, or retrograde again. It's a little bit delayed perhaps into the cycle that we're about to enter into. But so with the North Node in Libra, right, Libra is, this is the collective evolution through diplomacy, through shared agreements. Libra is agreements as well, law and balance, cooperation between nations, and artistic flowering. And then the Aries South Node is the release of Bruce Fort, tribal sovereignty, impulsive conquest, and the idea of might makes right. So this is the shift from warrior kings to enlightenment philosophers, from conquest to treaties, and from sword to pen. So it's kind of like a karmic balancing from centuries of war. Transition from monarchies to diplomacy, parliament, constitutions, and international agreements. So then we look to see where Jupiter is, and we have the Jupiter and Moon here in the sign of Scorpio. Scorpio is very deep, and it unveils hidden things, right? It is transformation. It is going into the dark. So this epoch is driven by unveiling hidden knowledge, especially because Jupiter represents wisdom, penetrating the mysteries, exploring the occult sciences, anatomy, medicine, sexuality, alchemy turning into chemistry, mysticism turning into psychology, and metaphysics birthing early science. And Jupiter also represents growth, right? So this is growth through taboo breaking, and emotional intensity. So it's the age of alchemists, hermeticists, Rosicrucians, Freemasons, occult revival, early scientific inquiry into the forbidden realms, and the world was shedding religious dogma and entering into discovery. And this is very much like our emotions were, and our family systems, and the people. Moon also represents the people, was deep into these hidden realms with Scorpio. Okay, so then we look to see where the sun was, what flavor the sun was giving, and the sun was here in Pisces with Venus at 0 degrees. So Venus being at 0 degrees, this is like the birthing point of the Pisces energy. Venus is exalted in Pisces. That's where it does the best. So this is the mystic heart of the cycle. So this brings artistic, poetic, and a spiritually romantic heart to this era. It is infusing the time period with compassion, mystical yearning, right? That's the Pisces. Spiritual flowering, artistic renaissance. Venus brings a lot of artistic creation to this very already creative and artistic sign. Music as divine language, imagination awakening, and again, longing for unity. So this is showed a cultural explosion of Baroque music, sacred art, mystical poetry, expansion of missionary mysticism, new devotional practices, and romanticization of the divine. Then we look to see what Saturn was doing, the boundaries, the structures. And Saturn was here in Aquarius with Mercury retrograde. So this is science, future, experimentation, rebellion, and sovereignty. So this is what helped birth the century of intellectual, right? Aquarius is an air sign. It's very intellectual. It's where we want to break out of the box. It's technology, things like that. So a century of intellectual revolution, scientific discovery, and social reformation. It also represents the collective. So this is the signature of scientific revolution. Newton, calculus, astronomy and physics, early democracy, Enlightenment philosophy, encyclopedias, birth of rationality, and human rights doctrines. And then Mercury retrograde kind of brought in the revision of knowledge, the rediscovery of some ancient texts, and reinterpretation of natural law. And Saturn was brought in the structure of systems and like the scientific method and institutions of learning. So then we look to Uranus. Uranus again was retrograde in Gemini. So this is the communication awakening, similar to 1862, only this is the earlier communication. So there was literary expansion and explosion of writing, newspapers, coded messages, secret societies, rapid communication, evolution, and intellectual networking. And retrograde again means that the transformation was a little bit internal, brewing, and invisible. Then we look to see where Pluto was, and Pluto was retrograde in Leo along with Chiron retrograde in Leo. So this indicates a transformation of kingships, right? Leo kind of represents kings. Wounding with Chiron of monarch identity, crisis of divine right rule, personal sovereignty under challenge, with the Pluto especially, ego death of aristocracies, and the wounded leader archetype, because Leo is very much leadership entity. So this is the seed of the fall of monarchies. This is the French Revolution, American Revolution, collapse of divine right monarchy, and birth of individual rights. Chiron retrograde in Leo is equal to the like leadership wounds, and then Pluto retrograde is transformation of royalty, identity, and personal power. So the synopsis of this period is humanity awakens the mind, questions authority, sheds the old kings, explores the hidden cosmos, and begins shift from monarchy into enlightened, self-governing civilization. Spirit whispers into humanity's ear, not with swords, but ideas. The world begins to organize itself around philosophy rather than fear. The veils of sacred mystery lift, not into chaos, but into revelation. Knowledge becomes holy. Reason becomes the new cathedral. And people begin to ask, what if the divine lives within every mind, not just every king? So 1698, this chart births enlightenment, and 1862 weaponized it and regained control. Like 1862 brought this sovereignty feeling to it, and 1862 brought it back into the reign of control of the people that didn't want people to know that we have our own sovereignty and don't need them, which is kind of, 2026 ingress is kind of completing this 330-year arc of awakening, but it does go deeper than that. I do go back further than that, and one thing that I have noticed is overall, and that's why I wanted to go back, was overall it seems like there will be, with the Neptune and Aries cycles, it seems to oscillate between a period of time of individualization and recognizing that spirit is within and that we don't need to outsource our spirituality and things like that. And then, systems after at the next cycle will take back control and like that knowing that you have a divine connection, that you can connect straight to the divine, and mysticism and things like that have to go underground until the next cycle when they can come back out. So there's been this like swinging back and forward that I've noticed when looking at this. And with that, with looking at these last two cycles and just with the feeling that I've had within my own soul and within the own spiritual growth that I have done, I feel like this next time period, and what the current astrology is suggesting, that this next time period is unlike any other, and that it is huge. It is big. There's a lot of astrological signatures in the astrology of 2026 that have not happened ever before, especially all combined into one. And January is one of those things. February, when Saturn comes and meets Neptune at 0 degrees of Aries, that is another big turning point that we'll look into. But I feel like this is a very exciting and heavy, but heavy in a good way, time. But so before I wanted to go look at the current year cycle and what the astrology is saying about that, looking at it in this format, I was called to go look to way back to 106 BC to 58 AD. So, and then look at the cycles from that time period that preceded and contained Jesus's life, and then the 2 or 3 cycles after his death, and then looking at current, bringing that back into our mind and looking at tomorrow's astrology. So if you want to go through that, stick around. Again, the links to timestamps will be in the description. You can always jump ahead to the current astrology of what is going on if you're not interested in going way, way back with me. Okay, so now this is actually negative or 102 BC. I said 106. It's actually 102. So this is the cycle right basically before Jesus, or leading up to his life and death. His life and death came, near the end of the cycle, as the cycle went through AD 60. So this is the seed of the era that birthed Jesus, the Essenes, the mystery schools, and the spiritual destabilization of the Mediterranean world. So this chart here looks like a very simple chart. Brought mythic fire, prophetic birth, kingdoms falling, sacred law collapsing, revelation through suffering, rise of wisdom teachers, new covenants, dissolving of old orders, and rebirth of the archetypal Son of God. The time period saw the fall of old Mediterranean empires, the rise of Rome, the Essene movement, the final phase of Jewish apocalyptic prophecy, the birth and life of Jesus, the dissolution of the mystery schools, Eleusis, Orphics, and Mithraics, and spiritual hunger of the ancient world. So now we are going to break it apart. So here we have, right here, Neptune at the 0 degree point of Aries, and Mars, the ruler of it, is here in Virgo retrograde at the beginning degree of Virgo. So this is apparently one of the rarest and most spiritually charged signatures of these Neptune cycles, and it represents a warrior, Mars, entering purification, right? Virgo has a lot of rituals. It's the likes to categorize things. It likes to, taste it, touch it, smell it, feel it, etc. So it's the warrior entering purification. It's the masculine principle undergoing correction. It's sacred service. Virgo is an energy of service. It's the healer warrior archetype, because Virgo does represent healing. It's ritual purification practices, spiritual teachers emerging from humble service, fall of violent empires through internal decay, and karmic correction with the retrograde of misused power. So then next, let's look to see where Jupiter is. And we actually have, so we have Jupiter, the Sun, Uranus, the South Node, Venus, and Mercury retrograde, all stacked up in Capricorn here. This is pretty huge. This is a 6-planet stellium, so you can't deny the influence of the Capricorn energy here in this cycle. That is for sure. So then what does Capricorn represent, right? It represents structure and law and empires and kingship, worldly authority, the material plane because it's an earth sign, time, karma, and incarnation. And yeah, it represents structures and systems and what we work towards, things like that. So Jupiter is the fall and rebirth of religious authority. The Sun here is the incarnation of divine authority into human form. Mercury retrograde is the incarnation of divine, is the reinterpretation of sacred law. Venus here is devotion and love and things like that through discipline, because Capricorn is a very discipline type structure, type energy. Uranus is radical restructuring of the structures. So this is kind of the astrological prelude to both the destruction and rebirth of the covenantal faith. So, and it lines up with the collapse of the South Seleucid Empire, destabilization of Israel under Roman rule, corruption of the priestly class, Pharisees versus Sadducees, Essene rejection of the temple system, spiritual exhaustion of empire, and yearning for a Messiah to restore divine order. So then Capricorn, the ruler of Capricorn is Saturn, but Saturn is one of the planets that is not here, and Saturn also represents structure and authority and things like that. So we need to look to see where that is, and that is here with the moon in Sagittarius, which is belief systems and things like that. So this is the prophetic fire. So Sagittarius rules prophecy, scripture, quests for the truth, belief systems, religion, messianic expectation, pilgrimage, because it represents foreign cultures, foreign lands, and spiritual philosophy. It is the sign of religion and overall belief systems. So the moon and Saturn together in Sagittarius brings prophecy with weight, because Saturn is a very heavy, restrictive, planet. Karmic, Saturn it rules karma. So karmic cycles of religious expectation, a time is ripe feeling, ancient scriptures coming to life, because Saturn also represents, times before, and maturity and things like that. So maturation of spiritual teachings as well, discipline of the spiritual law, and sense of a coming revelation. So the moon representing the people and Saturn representing karma is in the sign of prophecy and religious beliefs and things like that. So then we look to see where Chiron is. AstroSeek actually doesn't have Chiron on here, and I'm not sure exactly why. Oh, I think just because it doesn't go back that far. as far as Chiron, they can't be 100% sure. For whatever reason, when I was putting all these chart details into ChatGPT, it said that Chiron would be at 0 degrees of Aries. I can't be certain of that, so I don't even want to bring it up. But you could dive into that if you want, because that would be pretty fascinating. Like, we're about to have Neptune conjunct Saturn. But to start this cycle off with Neptune conjunct Chiron, the wounded healer, that would be pretty amazing. But I don't really want to dive into it. The other thing that would be particularly fascinating about that, though, is, Chiron is the wounded healer. Chiron is currently in Aries. So to kind of finish out the cycle would be really interesting, because it would kind of be the incarnate spark, the birth of the new identity, the birth of the wounded healer. And Chiron and Aries often shows, which is probably part of the reason why they put it here, besides their, for the most part, I trust ChatGPT, but I'm not 100% sure how confident it could be at this, placing this in the right spot. But it would make sense, because Chiron and Aries often shows archetypal savior figures, spiritual martyrs, wounded kings, healers who must suffer to teach, and paradigm-shifting spiritual beings. And the world at this time needed a healer whose very existence challenged empire structures, right? So it would make sense. But I'm not putting a ton of weight on that. So then we would look to Pluto. So Pluto is here in Aries, and it's retrograde. So Pluto is in Aries, is kind of representing the destruction and rebirth of nations, especially with it being in a trine here, to Mars and Virgo, and some of the planets here. This, at least Mercury retrograde in Capricorn. So this is power reborn, the rise of Rome, and represents the rise of Rome into an unstoppable force. At the same time, destruction of old kingdoms, transformation of Israel under empirical rule, rebirth of revolutionary movement, uprisings and messianic rebels, immense pressure pushing toward radical change. So Pluto can be violent contraction that precedes spiritual revelation, and Pluto retrograde in Aries, it kind of represents that the transformation comes from within civilizations. Corruption, rot, internal betrayal, and like a spiritual deadness. And Pluto retrograde also, right? Like not only is Pluto power structures and Aries, as leaders and stuff like that. So a transformation of leaders, but Aries is also the self. So an internal transformation of individuals living within this time period as well. So then we look to the nodes, and we have the North Node here in Cancer and the South Node here in Capricorn. So this is kind of the return to the divine motherhood, right? Cancer is the very nurturing energy. It represents the mother, it represents the home, the family, things like that. Nurture, care, compassion. So then the South Node in Capricorn is, letting go of corrupt institutions, rigid priestly authority, law without love, right? Nurturing, a lot of loving energy in Cancer, and empire without heart. And so the birth of Jesus at the end of this cycle, right, embodies that law to love, temple to heart, authority changed to compassion, and empire to the kingdom within. So that is kind of this opposition, like changing from this heavy Capricorn to, by the end, embodying kind of that energy. So the synopsis of this era is: the empires of the world tremble under their own weight. Old laws grow brittle, and the hearts of the people cry out. Into this world of collapsing kingdoms, the divine prepares a new incarnation of truth. A healer is needed. A prophet is needed. A teacher who bridges heaven and earth. Spiritual wound of humanity demands a new covenant, not written on stone, but in the human heart. And so a light begins to gather. So yeah, this chart kind of represents all of that. So next we're going to look at the chart of the time period right after, 30 years after Jesus's death, and what that chart indicated was coming after his death, which is fascinating. Okay, so this is the chart of 61 AD. So in this chart, it indicates the divine spark unleashed. So if 106 BC signaled the coming of the Christ impulse, then this chart signals the unleashing of the Christ impulse into humanity. This time was 30 years after Jesus' death. It was during the rise of Paul and the early ecclesia. This was during the Jewish-Roman tensions leading to the Second Temple's destruction. This was during the first spread of Christian mysticism, during the codification of early mystery teachings into public form. And so then if we look at the details of this time, so we have, again, here Neptune in Aries at 0 degrees, and we have the ruler Mars in Aries. So this is pure, unfiltered divine will, right? Mars is our willpower, our motivation and our drive, and having it in its home sign, it is the traditional ruler of Aries. So having its home sign, it just is adding to the Neptune energy, and it is pure, unfiltered will. So this is the cycle of, and it's individuals, right? So this is the cycle of apostles, evangelists, zealots, mystics on missions, rebellions, because it's the warrior, right? So political and spiritual. The spread of Christ energy by force of conviction, spiritual activism, explosive revelation, expansion of mystical teachings outside old boundaries. So it's an era of Paul's missions, the Essene diaspora, so the breaking up of the Essenes, Gnostic communities forming, mystery school teachings among Greeks, Egyptians, and Syrians, Jewish revolt against Rome, and fiery purification of old structures. So this is the spiritual warrior movement, the ignition of Christianity as a force of spiritual rebellion, is what this time brought. So if we look to see where the sun was, the sun is with Venus here in Pisces. So this is kind of where the Christ mystery goes universal, right? Pisces. So Pisces is universal love, sacrifice, compassion, mysticism, miracles, dissolution of boundaries, and that Christ energy. And then the sun plus Venus combined here is the spiritualization of love. Love as salvation and love as cosmic law. And so we see healing through compassion, forgiveness as liberation, more unity consciousness, the kingdom of God within, mystical experiences of oneness and devotion and grace. And again, kind of similar to the 1698 chart, which also had, they weren't as in tight of a conjunction, but the 1698 chart also had the Sun and Venus in Pisces, and that was another rise of this, universal, like the spirit is within, love, compassion, all of that. So that's interesting to note. So then we look to see where Uranus is, and Uranus is here in Sagittarius, conjunct the moon. So again, this, Sagittarius is the sign of belief systems, of foreign lands, of, aiming, looking long term, aiming for the above. So this is the global spread. Moon represents people, and Uranus, as the planet of things shaking up, divine insight, not necessarily transformation, but just things crumbling and being reborn. So Sagittarius, represents in this time period preachers, missionaries, philosophy, scripture, and global travel. Moon is the people. That was the word I was looking for. And Uranus is revolution. So this combination breeds a radical new philosophy sweeping across many nations. So the birth of early Christian communities in Greece, Asia, Ethiopia, and Rome. Then we look to see what Pluto is doing, and Pluto is here at 0 degrees of Aquarius, with Mercury in Aquarius. And just a side note, right, in current times, Pluto is also in Aquarius. It's about at 3 degrees of Aquarius right now. So this is the birth of esoteric Christianity, so perhaps we could see something similar to that in the current timeline, which we'll get to. So Aquarius is revelation, esoteric knowledge, celestial blueprint. Like Aquarius does rule astrology. It's one of the signs. Both Sagittarius and Aquarius have correspondences to astrology. Collective awakening, spiritual brotherhood, secret texts, radical equality. So Mercury represents the mind, right, and our thinking and learning and things like that. So it represents new teachings. Aquarius is out of the box things too, and technology and things like that. So new teachings, new thought forms, new scriptures. So this is a period of early Gnostic writings. I'm not sure how to say it, the Didache. I had to look up what that was. I had not heard of that, and it is apparently the earliest writings of the 12 apostles. The Gospel of Thomas in oral form also came during this time period, and philosophical reinterpretations of Christ's teachings came through this period. And then Pluto here indicates, especially at 0 degrees, right, is power shifts to the community, not priesthood. So this is the seed of the early ecclesia, the called out community, spiritual equality, distributed leadership, communal mysticism, and the end of temple-based religion. So this is Proto-Aquarian Christianity. It's the original esoteric mystical tradition that's far older than the Romanized institution that came later. And with the current chart, I believe this is what, with such heavy Aquarian themes in the current chart that we're going to get to, I think this is, along with Jupiter retrograde being in Cancer, I think this is bringing a lot of the Jesus themes back. The, mother, divine motherhood, the mysticism, and his teachings, like the rediscovering the early writings and the ancient texts that were excluded mostly for the sake of power, which we're going to get in the next cycle. But so yeah, it's interesting, which is why I wanted to go through this history, because this is what I've been feeling in my soul. So then we look to see where Jupiter is in this cycle, and it is retrograde in the sign of Scorpio at 1 degree. So another early degree, right? Pluto is at 0, Jupiter is at 1. Neptune in the south node, which we haven't talked about yet, is in the beginning of Aries. So a lot of beginning energy here. So Jupiter retrograde in Scorpio. So Scorpio is hidden things, right? And rules over the occult and things like that. So this is mystery teachings and hidden doctrines. So Scorpio is the mysteries. It's the death and rebirth cycle and initiation. And Jupiter, ruling wisdom, is the expansion of like spiritual knowledge. Retrograde means that it kind of has to be hidden and underground, and it represents that it's more esoteric in essence. So this corresponds with secret gatherings, oral teachings versus public scripture, initiation rites, sacraments, mystery traditions around the resurrection, first Gnostic schools, healing rituals, and baptism as mystical death and rebirth. So this is the era of the hidden church before Christianity goes public. That's what this kind of represents. So then we look to see where Saturn is, and Saturn is in Gemini here. So this combination is doctrinal conflict and textual formation. So Gemini represents, learning and stuff. So text, communication, interpretation, arguments, teachings, discipleship, and literacy. And Saturn brings structure, discipline, crystallization, conflict, and division. So the combination of these two brought struggle to define the teachings, fragmentation of doctrines, debate about meanings, and formation of the sacred texts. So it kind of brought the which gospel is true and foreshadowed later canon wars. So then now we're going to look at the North Node and South Node. So the North Node was actually over here in Libra, with the South Node conjunct Neptune entering Aries. So the North Node in Libra is the birth of the spiritual community. So Libra is all about partnership, fairness, justice, right? Those types of things. So this brought spiritual partnership, community, unity, non-violence, sacred brotherhood, peacemaking, and collective spiritual purpose. So this is where, Christian community was seen as family, formation of teachings centered on forgiveness, peacemaking, all Libra themes, where 2 or 3 gather, right? Communal prayer and sharing resources. So the overarching synopsis of this time period was the divine spark planted through the one now ignites the many. The world is aflame with new revelation, fierce with new truth, ready to carry love into battle against empire. A movement is born, a brotherhood of light arises. What was taught in secret will spread across nations. The temple will fall, structures will crumble, and a new form of humanity will awaken. The birth of the Aquarian mystery within the Piscean age. So this cycle, 8061, produced the spread of early Christianity, the formation of esoteric Christian communities, Gnostic, Essene, and mystery school influence flourished. This was the destruction of the Second Temple, Rome's tightening control, the rise of martyrs, the first Christian texts, doctrinal division, spiritual activism, and first global philosophy of unconditional love. And that doctrinal division can be seen both in the early Christian traditions. There were many different sects forming and many different translations and things like that, as well as there were a lot of division among and many different belief systems within the Jewish community as well. And it was after the destruction of the Second Temple that the rabbinic tradition kind of gained the most popularity. Okay, so from there I wanted to look at the next cycle, because I know that the next cycle is when the Bible of today was created, right? So the chart looks pretty good with a lot of trines and things like that. But so this is AD 389. This is the chart basically of Christianity's institutionalization, its distortion, and the severing of mystical teachings from the public tradition. So this is the time period when the Roman Empire officially takes control of Christianity. The mystical path, so the Essenes, the Gnostic, and the Christic mystery teachings were eclipsed. Priestly hierarchy replaces the original spiritual brotherhood. Doctrine becomes political. The feminine, mystical, and interior tradition is systemically erased, and the Church of Jesus basically becomes the Church of Rome. So this time period marks the transformation basically from a spiritual movement to imperial religion. So, using the same system, we have Neptune and Aries here. The ruler of Neptune of Aries is Mars. And we have, let's see. Well, first, just backing up to looking at, so this is, and I kind of already said a lot of this, but Christianity is declared the only legal religion. Pagan temples were destroyed, mystery schools were shut down, Gnostic texts were burned, esoteric teachings were suppressed, the Great Library of Alexandria was attacked, bishops were gaining political power, and we saw the formation of state-sponsored doctrine. So this is when the empire decides who Jesus is allowed to be and interprets for us who he was. The Christ impulse now becomes politicized, weaponized, dogmatized, and standardized. The original mystical teachings have to go underground, that later resurfacing in desert fathers, Sufis, Kabbalists, and Cathars, etc. So then we look to see where all the astrology is and how it points to this happening. So the dispositor was Mars in Libra. Mars in Libra here. So, Mars being the ruler, it is the planet that colors the entire 165-year cycle. So Mars, being the planet, the warrior, the divine, the will, and those types of things. This can bring conflict through law, right? Because Libra is all about relationships and law and justice and fairness and things like that. But so this indicates Mars here indicates conflict through law, spiritual warfare becoming legal warfare, councils, courts, decrees, theological battles instead of mystical experience, diplomacy masking coercion, wars fought in the name of peace, and enforcement of orthodoxy. So it says this is the exact signature of the councils of the church, especially the Council of Constantinople in 381, the Council of Carthage in 397, and the Council of Chalcedon in 451, which was within this same cycle. So this Mars in Libra kind of represents the power won't be expressed through armies, but through councils and laws, through judgment, not revelation. So this is the spiritual fall from mysticism into bureaucracy and laws and things like that. So then we can look to see where the North Node is, and it is here in Aquarius with an Aquarius stellium, which is also what we've got going on right now. So that is interesting to note. We talked about the Aquarius piece of the last cycle as well. So we have the Moon, Venus, and Mercury here in this stellium. So this is the intellectualization, right? Because Aquarius is air, it's the mind, it's the intellect, the intellectualization of faith. So Aquarius rules things like doctrine, ideology, collective identity, systems, councils, orthodoxy, approved texts, heresy versus truth, social control, and intellectual frameworks. So especially because we don't see anything over here in Pisces, this is kind of the intellectualization, right? It becomes Christianity becomes a system rather than spiritual practice, a creed instead of an experience. And this is when canon law emerges, creed begins to replace personal revelation, church offices, bishop, deacon become political roles, and communities are forced into uniform doctrine, and theology replaces mysticism. And I think part of why this happened so easily, right? So Aquarius at this level is ideological purification plus authoritarian intellectualism, which is because of this Mars over here in Libra, making a trine over here, right? So this is when Jesus the mystic becomes Jesus the imperial Christ. So then we want to look to the sun. So the sun is over here in Capricorn. So this is the rise of ecclesiastical power, right? Sun, both Mars and Sun represent the power. Capricorn rules the hierarchy, the institutions, the governments, the structures, the authority, the empire, and worldly control. So Sun in Capricorn is spiritual authority becomes political authority. So this is precisely the era when bishops, like said, become governors. The Pope emerges as a political figure. Church and empire merge, and Christianity becomes the administrative skeleton of Rome. So Capricorn, Sun in Capricorn is kind of saying the divine must now serve institution. This is kind of the choking of the Christ impulse. So then we look to see where Pluto is, and Pluto is at the last degree, the final degree of Aries, which is pretty telling. So this is the death of the original mystery tradition, which kind of makes sense if, in fact, Chiron during the time period of Jesus's birth was at 0 degrees of Aries, and then Pluto, representing death and rebirth in this cycle, is at the 29th degree of Aries, the final degree of Aries. The death of the original mystery tradition makes sense. So, yeah, any of the 29th degrees of any signs is like the completion of the lessons of those signs, and Pluto is, you know, the planet of transformation, the death, rebirth cycle, those things. So Pluto is destructions, endings, power struggles, transformation, and loss. And at 29 degrees, this is the final death of the original spiritual identity birthed by Jesus and the apostles. And this definitely lines up with what I feel internally. But this is where Gnosticism is outlawed, Essene teachings disappear, mystery schools close, women are removed from leadership, Mary Magdalene's role is erased, the kingdom within is lost because you can't hold power over people when the kingdom is within. The literal replaces the symbolic. And mysticism is demonized. This goes all the way back to back then. So this is one reason. So it says this is the turning point from Christos to Christendom. Christos to Christendom. Whatever. But this is, what was I going to say? This is one reason, I feel like in our culture and our society today, the term occult is very much given a negative connotation, right? So if you're interested in the occult sciences, like I am, like tarot and astrology, and learning about the kingdom within and looking at these mystery schools that perhaps Jesus went to and wanting to know what the teachings were that were not allowed to be included in the canonical Bible, right? You're seen as somebody who is evil and things like that. And this is the time period that did that. So this is a fascinating chart for me to look at because I have always naturally, with very Aquarius heavy, so thinking outside the box, doing things different, Scorpio heavy, ninth house heavy, I've always been attracted to digging deeper into religion, looking at all the religions, seeing where the universal symbolism is, and looking at being drawn to the occult and hidden knowledge, right? Occult is just hidden. And this is why this is the time period that all of the original spiritual identity birthed by Jesus and the apostles was hidden and deleted, basically. So continuing on, then we go to Uranus in Scorpio. Here we go. So, Scorpio, again, is the occult, the taboo, the hidden, the dark, hidden secrets, the death, rebirth cycle. So this is taboo, suppression, and destabilization. So Uranus rules rebellion and Scorpio rules secrets. So this is where the underground continuation of the esoteric path exists. It's the desert mystics, it's the hermits, it's the underground Gnostic cells, it's esoteric Judaism and Kabbalah's early rumblings, the continuation of mystery teachings in secret. And so while the church suppresses the mystical, Uranus in Scorpio thankfully preserves it underground. So then we look to see where Saturn is. Saturn is in Virgo. Saturn is in Virgo retrograde right here at 1 degree. So at the beginning of Virgo. So like we talked about, Saturn is law, authority, restriction, structures. Virgo is that priesthood, that service, that purity, that editing, that categorization, right? So Saturn retrograde in Virgo is the codification of scripture, canon, liturgy, and orthodoxy. So this marks the closing of the biblical canon, the removal of esoteric writings, the rejection of alternative gospels, elevation of approved texts, purification of the doctrine, and institutional control over spiritual practice. This is where the era in which the Bible becomes the Bible, not a living set of mystical teachings, but a fixed structure. So Saturn retrograde also suggests karmic distortion. What was removed was important, and what remains is incomplete. Okay, so then we look to see where Gemini, or where Jupiter is, which is in Gemini, and it is retrograde in Gemini. So this is the splintering of interpretation. So Gemini, right, rules the text, the literacy, the teaching, and communication. And Jupiter retrograde, Jupiter is wisdom and things like that, right? So retrograde is revisionism, distortion, reinterpretation, multiple versions of teachings, right? Because Jupiter is abundance in all things. So this is the era of contradictory church fathers, competing theologies, the shattering of unity, emergence of pseudo-gospels, suppression of some texts, elevation of others, and theological confusion. So Jupiter retrograde in Gemini is where the teachings split, multiply, and are reinterpreted. And this is not the faith that Jesus taught. This is more a reaction to the empire. Okay, and then we have the nodes. So we have the North Node in Aquarius, South Node in Leo. So this is destiny through ideology. So with all the, control going on in Capricorn and things like that this is ideological conformity, group identity, because Aquarius is the collective, doctrinal alignment, and collective belief structures. So the world becomes organized not around spirituality, but around belonging to the correct belief group. This is the birth of dogmatic religion. So the synopsis is the empire claims the throne of heaven. What was mystic becomes administrative. What was experiential becomes doctrinal. What was liberating becomes a tool of control, and a new identity is imposed upon the Christ, and the fire of the mysteries is forced underground. A religion is born, but the path is lost. So what this created was, this cycle was Christianity becoming the state religion, destruction of the mystery schools, canon formation and biblical editing, suppression of esoteric teachings, the rise of dogma, and consolidation of the church hierarchy. Also, theological battles and councils, loss of feminine and mystical traditions, persecution of heretics, and Temple of the Mysteries transformed into the Cathedral of Rome. This is the era where Christianity ceases to be the way that Jesus taught and becomes the political church that Rome built. So one more time frame before we get to the current time frame. Okay, so the next time period was 552. So this marks the collapse of the old Roman Christian world and the rise of monastic mysticism and the deep burial of the original Christ mysteries beneath the structures of medieval church. So if 389 or whatever the last one was the institutionalization of Christianity, this 552 is the implosion of that institution and transmutation of the Christ impulse into hidden inner mystical practice. So this is the ingress that ushers humanity into the fall of Rome, the birth of Dark Ages, the ascendancy of the monastic life, Christian mysticism going underground, the preservation of sacred knowledge only in cloistered communities, the extinction of the last mystery schools, the beginning of feudal Christendom, and the severe distortion of Jesus's teachings into penitential theology. So we're going to go through this similar to how we have been. So kind of re-saying what I said. So every ingress bursts a new spiritual epoch, but this one happens amid catastrophic civilizational collapse. So this time period is when Rome is sacked again. The Western Empire is practically dead. Europe is depopulated. We have climate collapse, late antique little ice age. Plagues devastate the population. Trade routes fail. Literacy collapses. Pagan scholarship disappears, and Christianity becomes the only surviving cultural institution. So this is the most traumatic Neptune and Aries cycle in history, a spiritual rebirth through global disintegration. Kind of sounds very similar to today. Not gonna lie. Okay, so let's see if there are any similarities. So the dispositor, the ruler of Neptune and Aries here, is Mars in Taurus. And it is conjunct to the North Node here, which we'll get to later. So Mars in Taurus shapes the tone of the entire cycle. So Taurus likes to move slow. It's heavy. It's stubborn. It's known as the most stubborn sign. It's very grounded. Represents our agricultural systems, our financial systems, right? It's very survival oriented, materially focused, conservative, and it's a fixed sign. It's resistant to change. So this is the cycle of the agrarian monastery, the feudal lord, and the survival church. So Mars in Taurus, spiritual energy becomes tied to land, property, and material stability. So what emerges then is monasteries owning vast lands, monks farming and copying texts. Christianity becomes agrarian and static. The spiritual world turning inward, repetitive, and ritualistic. Mysticism reduced to labor and prayer, and dogma hardening into stone. So if Mars and Aries in AD 61 spread the gospel as fire, and Mars in Libra in the last cycle codified faith into law, then this Mars in Taurus roots Christianity into land, ritual, and survival. This is the cycle of the monastic, not the mystical. But if we look to see where Jupiter, the Sun, and Saturn are, they are over here in a stellium in Pisces. We have Jupiter, the Sun, Saturn, and Mercury retrograde. So, and Pisces is the energy of the Christ consciousness, right? The universal love, the compassion, things like that. So 4 major planets in Pisces is the most devotional, mystical, inward, spiritual era since the early days of Christianity. But, and this is critical, it's not public mysticism, it's cloistered mysticism. So Pisces energy here manifests as monasteries becoming centers of spiritual life, contemplative prayer, copying sacred texts. We have seen several sacred texts re-emerge from these monasteries, copying them down. Mysticism practiced behind stone walls, loss of public literacy, theology becoming abstract and inaccessible, salvation focused on suffering and sacrifice, deep yearning for divine mercy, and penance theology dominating Christianity. So Pisces and Saturn in Pisces is institutionalized sorrow. Saturn's a heavy, heavy energy, collective suffering, and devotional asceticism. Pisces plus Jupiter, on the other hand, is expansive mysticism, visions, miracles, saints, and monastic revelations. And Pisces plus Mercury retrograde is rewriting, reinterpreting, and often distorting theology. So this is the cycle where doctrines like original sin, eternal damnation, purgatory, and substitutionary atonement become dominant, none of which Jesus actually taught, apparently. This is something I am definitely diving into more, because this is kind of what I've thought internally. Like, this type of stuff has always not necessarily sat with me. So to see this is a little bit of confirmation, but it is something that I want to do this year, is to dive more into those ancient texts, the hidden texts, more of the occult mystery teachings that were hidden and kept secret. So then, along with Neptune in Aries, we also have Venus in Aries. So this is the spiritual feminine is suppressed and reborn in pain. So it says Venus in Aries is the feminine. Venus represents feminine energy. And in Aries, the sign of not only the I am energy, right, but the individual energy, but also the warrior, the sign of the warrior. So this is the feminine fighting for rebirth, the warrior goddess energy, Mary Magdalene's suppressed lineage, the loss of the sacred feminine, emergence of warrior saints, and intensification of patriarchal control. But in the background whisper, it is also the rise of Marian devotion, Sophia mysticism hidden in monasteries, Celtic Christian reverence for nature, and early hints of future feminine mystics, Bridgen, Hilda, Hildegard later. This is the seed of the hidden feminine that returns in future cycles. Then we look to see where Pluto is, and it is over here in Aquarius, which again, it is, in Aquarius now at about 3 degrees, not 2. So this is the death of knowledge and the rebirth of hidden wisdom. So what the previous cycle brought was the intellectual civilization. Well, with Pluto here, and there was the big stellium, right? Well, with Pluto here, it is the collapse of intellectual civilization. So Aquarius, again, rules knowledge, science, literacy, philosophical schools, and collective structures. And Pluto destroys Aquarius here, and libraries burn, mystery schools vanish, philosophy dies, mathematics regresses, esoteric teachings disappear, only monasteries preserve writing. But Pluto also transforms Aquarius, where knowledge goes underground into coded, symbolic, mystical forms. So this is the seed of alchemy, early Kabbalah, monastic esoteric traditions, sacred geometry preserved in architecture, the Arthurian mysteries, and hidden Christian mysticism. So Pluto in Aquarius says, the world forgets the mysteries, but the mysteries do not forget the world. So basically, it's not the time yet for these things to become unhidden, which is what I'm hoping the current time that we are moving into is. It is more the time that these things are going underground. So then we look to see where Uranus is, and Uranus is in Scorpio retrograde here. So this is the underground river of the mysteries, right? Scorpio is that underground, that Plutonian energy. So this is the hidden survival of the mystery teachings. So this corresponds with Celtic Christianity, which is deeply mystical, desert fathers preserving secret practices, monastic mystics developing visionary prayer, early esoteric Judaism surviving through secrecy, preservation of hermetic texts in isolated places, and underground transmission of sacred geometry. This is the embryonic return of ancient mysteries hiding in shadows. And then we also have the North Node over here in Taurus and the South Node in Scorpio. So this is destiny through survival, land, and embodiment. So the North Node in Taurus wants simplicity, survival, land-based spirituality, embodiment, ritual repetition, practical devotion, and rebuilding from the soil up. So this is the spiritual destiny of the cycle. So it's a grounded, quiet, embodied spiritual movement, even in the underground, right? A turning inward to survive the dark, a preservation of the spark until the world is ready again. The summary of this time period: the empire crumbles, the world grows dark. Spirituality retreats into stone walls where monks guard the last embers of the mystery. The teachings are rewritten through suffering. Knowledge dies, yet wisdom buries itself like a seed. The Christ light dims publicly but glows fiercely in hidden chambers. A new age begins, not of revelation, but of preservation. So this cycle of 552 to about 716 corresponds to the collapse of Rome and beginning of the Dark Ages, the rise of monastic Christianity, preservation of sacred texts through the monasteries, loss of public mystical teachings, emergence of penitential theology, rewriting of doctrine through suffering, hidden survival of the mystery traditions, the slow germination of medieval esotericism, embodied simple survival-based spirituality. And so this cycle is kind of the deep night of Christian mysticism, but it plants the seeds of the revival that comes much later through things like the Celtic mysticism, High Middle Ages mystics, alchemy, Kabbalah, and Rosicrucians. So last, but certainly not least, we get to today's time period. Let me get it up on the screen. Okay, so I have high hopes for this, and this is what I have been feeling. So this is the chart of, let me forward it 10 minutes to get Neptune at 0 degrees. Okay, 0 degrees of Aries. If you've been following me, I've been talking a lot about this divine triangle, and that although there's chaos and things going on, I feel like things are moving in the right direction, I guess you could say. I just feel spiritually that way. And so this chart is very Aquarian, clearly. Revolutionary, mystical, initiatory, technologically spiritual, community-based, conscious expanding, Christic but not Christian, mystical but not religious, healing but not hierarchical. And this is the epoch where the mysteries come back to the people after 2,000 years of suppression. And I hope that that is certainly so. And I hope that I am alive to see the return of those things. But I truly do feel that it is in my calling to help bring them back as well, just through my own spiritual inclination to look at them, if nothing else. So bring them back into my own soul's experience, if not, into a public stage such as this. So this particular time period, right, every Neptune in Aries births a new spiritual era, and this one is different for 3 reasons. It's the first since the invention of global communication. And it occurs alongside Pluto entering Aquarius, along with the massive Aquarius stellium. So in cycles previous, we've seen either just Pluto in Aquarius or an Aquarius stellium, which has, had this collective institutionalization of it, or driving the knowledge underground. But I'm hoping with the combination of the two, it is the unveiling of those secrets. So, and it says, this is the cosmic announcement of the age of spiritual authority is over. The age of spiritual sovereignty begins. So Jesus initiated a 2,000-year cycle of awakening, and this ingress begins the cycle of the actual embodiment of that, which is super exciting, and I'm super hoping that that's true. And I think that a lot of people are feeling that within their souls. So we are leaving top-down religion, hierarchical priesthoods, dogma, institutions, and passive faith, and entering direct revelation, self-healing, mystical intelligence, intuition as truth, spiritual community, embodied divinity, and collective ascension. This is the rebirth of the mysteries, but democratized. So in this chart, Mars is in Aquarius, right? Which has not been the case in any of the other charts. So Mars in Aquarius is revolution, collective action, tech-driven, since Aquarius is technology, tech-driven activism, spiritual innovation, energetic liberation, decentralization, dismantling of institutional power, radical cooperation, rebellion against outdated structures, futuristic spiritual practices, and frequency and energy medicine. Compared to the previous cycles where AD 61, Mars was in Aries, that was the spread of Christianity. AD the 300s, legalizing and enforcing doctrine. AD 500s, Mars was in Taurus, the monastic survival. And then to more recent, 1698, Mars in Libra, diplomacy and enlightenment. And 1862, the most previous, was Mars in Sagittarius, which was ideology and political religion. So now, with Mars in Aquarius, it's revolutionizing spirituality itself. This is the cycle where spirituality fuses with science. Could be good or bad. Consciousness studies explode. Telepathy, intuition, psi research become mainstream. Energy medicine, and we see that with like the telepathy tapes, right? I really have been talking a lot about how I believe we're having a rise in our vibration and a rise in psychic abilities and things like that. Energy medicine replaces pharmacology. Astrology becomes legitimate. Collective healing movements arise. Old religion structures collapse. Spiritual community becomes decentralized. So going back to that where 2 or 3 gather, or even just, direct revelation. Awakening accelerates exponentially. So apparently this is the first Neptune ingress ever with Mars in Aquarius. So this is utterly new terrain that we have not been through before. So then we have the Aquarius stellium going on, right? And this is the age of spiritual rebellion. So this is extraordinary. So we have Neptune's dispositor, Mars, or Neptune's ruler. We have Pluto. We have the Sun, Mercury, and Venus are all in Aquarius. So this screams the return of the mysteries through collective consciousness. So Aquarius themes, right, are liberation, technological transformation, mystical science, intuitive intelligence, soul community, right? This is where the saying, your vibe, your vibe and your tribe. I can't think of the saying right now. Anyway, it's finding your vibe tribe. Global telepathic field, energy grids, radical inclusivity, the rise of the mystic teacher, collapse of outdated systems, and the spiritualization of technology. This is not New Age. This is the Aquarian Renaissance. So then if we kind of look at it individually, so Pluto in Aquarius is the transformation of humanity's consciousness. Pluto in Aquarius is collective awakening, collective power, collective truth. Previous Pluto in Aquarius areas were fall of monarchies, invention of electricity, American and French revolutions, publishing explosion, and human rights frameworks. And now it becomes overthrow of old religious systems, collapse of hierarchical power, decentralization of mysticism, the return of esoteric knowledge, activation of subtle body awareness, rise of collective healing, energy medicine going mainstream, the fusion of spirituality with technology, the awakening of humanity as a soul group, and this Neptune-Pluto resonance is so enormous that we'll still be talking about it for a long time. Like, this is really a seeding point that is unlike anything else. So then we look to see where Saturn is, and Saturn is here in the final degrees of Pisces, and is also here with the North Node. So this is the end of the Piscean age, and potentially end of karma, right? Saturn kind of represents karma. So Saturn at the final degree of Pisces, and that being the final degree of the entire zodiac, is the karmic dissolution of old belief systems. And then the Pisces North Node is completing the spiritual cycles that begun 2,000 years ago. So this is the great unbinding. And a karmic release of religious trauma, martyrdom consciousness, victim savior programming, hierarchical spirituality, dogma, fear-based teachings, patriarchal systems, and spiritual suppression. The Saturn-Neptune story that began AD 33 reaches its final dissolution here. This is the dissolution Pisces before the spiritual rebirth in Aries. So then we look to see where Jupiter is, and as I've discussed, Jupiter is here in Cancer, and it is retrograde, restoring the divine feminine, which is one of the things that I've been talking about. Not just restoring the divine feminine, but restoring, Jupiter is wisdom, retrograde is ancient, Cancer also represents like ancestry, so bringing back the ancient wisdom teachings in a very nurturing way. So Cancer rules motherhood, emotional intelligence, intuition, nurturing, protection, ancestral healing, and the sacred feminine. Jupiter expands what Cancer governs, and retrograde internalizes it. So this is the cycle where the Divine Mother returns, feminine mysticism rises, emotional healing becomes central, ancestral lines heal, family systems reorganize, intuition is respected culturally, rather than looked at as, you're crazy. If you can't taste it, touch it, smell it, feel it, don't believe it. So the intuition is that's kind of all we got. And the North Node is in Pisces is also helping us hold on to that. Embodiment replaces doctrine, home and hearth become sacred, and community replaces institution. So this is the return of what was lost in the AD 300, 389, or whatever that date was, and the feminine face of Christ consciousness. So then we look to see where Chiron is as well, and Chiron is here in Aries, and so this is the healing of identity. So Chiron in the same sign as Neptune's ingress is always potent. This is the healing of the ego, the healing of the masculine. So we're having healing of feminine and masculine at the same time, which we greatly need. Spiritual individuation, self-trust, re-owning personal power, healing trauma around being seen, courage to embody spiritual truth. And so this could potentially be the cycle where humanity heals the wound of separation, which is exciting. And then we have Uranus retrograde in Taurus at this chart, and the moon in Taurus. So this is the sacred body returns. So this is, right, because the moon represents the body. Uranus is, the shaking of things up. It's the intellectualization. It's the divine intuition, things like that. And Uranus literally does represent our nervous system as well, like electricity and our nervous system. So with Uranus and the moon in Taurus and Uranus retrograde, right, bringing the energy internal, this is the fusion of embodiment, somatics, nervous system healing, food being Taurus as medicine, herbalism, earth mysteries, eco-mysticism, and grounding spirituality into the physical world. This is the spiritualization of the physical and the physicalization of the spiritual. It's literally medical astrology's renaissance, which is what I am studying currently. So the entire story of this system, this time period, is the mysteries rise again, no longer hidden in temples nor buried in scripture. The people awaken, a new human identity is born, sovereign, intuitive, connected, and free. Spirituality becomes collective. Technology becomes sacred. Let's hope. Healing becomes natural. The feminine returns, but in a healed form, as well as hopefully the masculine returns in a healed form. The old world dissolves and the new world ignites. So through this cycle, we can expect the rise of conscious community, spirituality fusing with science and tech, the return of energy medicine, sound healing, and astrology, the fall of old religious and political power structures, which we are definitely seeing, global psychic awakening, feminine spiritual leadership rises, esoteric wisdom resurfaces, collective trauma healing accelerates, a new form of Christianity emerges, which is non-dogmatic and more mystical, rebirth of mystery school lineages, personal spiritual sovereignty becomes the norm, and humanity steps into the early Aquarian age identity. So this is all super, super exciting. I did research the next cycle as well, which is around the year 2190, just seeing if it would follow the pattern of this individualization, mystery schools resurfacing and things like that, and power structures regaining control, right? Or things having to go underground. And I can go into that if you guys want, but in another video. But it does look like if this 2026 is the ignition of the new spiritual epoch, then the next one is the rooting of the light body into the human body. So it will just continue along this path and not be suppressed again. So yeah, it's basically the mysteries are being opened back up, and Christ consciousness and Christ's original teachings are basically resurfacing, and we are beginning to embody them, and that will continue, not be suppressed again, hopefully. So that is it. Sorry this video is so long, but there are the links for the timestamps. I hope you have enjoyed this. I hope you've gotten something out of it. Comment below with how you've enjoyed this, if you have, if you haven't. You know, I did use, in all honesty, I did use ChatGPT to help me kind of interpret all of this. So, you know, there could be, I know ChatGPT can sometimes be an echo chamber, so it may have been interpreting things based on how I have interpreted things in the past, right? So there is that to kind of keep in mind in the background. But if you know of any other astrologers that have gone deep like this, certainly let me know. I'd love to check out their videos as well. And also, like I said, Astrolata, she has done a great video on this ingress compared to just the last ingress into Pisces. So just comparing Pisces versus Aries and what that difference is. And so that's really good to listen to, because that's definitely, you know, our most recent journey through Pisces that we have experienced in our own lifetimes. So check her out. Otherwise, yeah, I look forward to doing more Neptune in Aries videos. I plan to do one by sign. I don't know when that's coming. There's a couple, I can't remember exactly what I was thinking of, but there's a couple different Neptune and Aries videos that I want to get to. So keep your eyes out for that. Give me a comment, like, subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.